There's a town in Maine where the first sunrise in America hits your kitchen window every single morning. The entire Main Street fits in 2 blocks, and the locals will tell you, with a straight face, that they'd rather you didn't move there. Median home price, $147,000. The catch? You have to actually want it. Maine is one of those states everyone thinks they know. You've seen the lighthouses, you've eaten the lobster roll, you've driven Route 1 in October and called it a personality trait. But here's what 37 million annual tourists keep missing. The Maine worth knowing isn't on Route 1. It's not in Portland, it's not in Bar Harbor, and it's definitely not in Kennebunkport. The Maine worth knowing is in the towns you drove past doing 60, the ones with boarded up mills and hand-painted open signs and ocean views that would cost you $4 million if they were 2 states south. Something is happening in these places. Former mill towns, where the last factory closed a decade ago, are filling back up, not with chains and franchises, but with breweries, artists, and remote workers who figured out that a mountain view and gigabit internet don't have to cost $600,000. Sardine cannery villages are turning into creative colonies. An inland town that lost its entire economic identity is reinventing itself around a national monument that didn't exist 5 years ago, and almost nobody is covering it. We found 8 Maine towns that deserve to be on your radar before the secret gets out. This is a countdown from number 8 to number 1, and we're escalating. We start easy, 20 minutes from Portland, low commitment. By the time we hit number 1, you'll be staring at the literal edge of the country wondering if you're brave enough. If you're new here, subscribe, because this channel finds the places everyone else overlooks. Drop a comment. Could you actually do Maine year-round? Let's find out. Location number 8, Biddeford, the mill town that woke up. We start just 20 minutes south of Portland in a town that, 10 years ago, most Mainers would have told you to skip. Biddeford was a textile mill city that peaked around 1900 and spent the next century slowly losing its reason to exist. The Pepperell Manufacturing Company, once the largest employer in town, shut its doors. The Sacco Lowell shops closed. Downtown emptied out. For decades, Biddeford was the punchline to a Portland joke. The rough neighbor you drove through on the way to somewhere better. And then something shifted. The massive brick mill complex along the Saco River, the one that sat dark and empty for years, started filling up. Artists moved in first because the rent was practically free. Breweries followed. A food hall opened. Co-working spaces appeared in buildings that once housed spinning looms. Biddeford didn't get a corporate redevelopment plan. It got a slow, organic takeover by people who couldn't afford Portland anymore and realized that 15 minutes down Route 1, you could rent studio space in a 19th century mill for less than a parking spot on Congress Street. Zillow puts the average home value in Biddeford at around $456,000. Redfin shows the median sale price at $463,000, with homes selling in roughly 34 days. That's not cheap by national standards, but put it next to Portland, where the median sits well above $500,000, and you start to see the math. Southern Maine coastal communities are pushing past $525,000 to $550,000 on average. Biddeford still comes in under that line, and you get a walkable downtown, river access, and a 7-minute drive to Fortune's Rocks Beach, one of the most underrated stretches of sand in New England. The trade-offs are real. Biddeford is still rough around certain edges. Some blocks feel revitalized, others feel like they're waiting their turn, and that turn might not come for another decade. Schools rate below the state average. Flooding risk hits about 21% of properties, which is something to take seriously when you're buying near a river in a state where climate patterns are shifting fast. And the Mill District renaissance, as charming as it is, means the town is already on people's radar. Prices climbed 12.5% year over year. This is not a sleeper pick anymore. It's a get in now before it becomes the next Portland suburb pick. A local realtor put it to us this way: Biddeford 5 years ago was a secret. Biddeford today is an open secret. Biddeford in 5 more years is just expensive. Take that for what it's worth. But as an entry point to this list, Biddeford makes sense. It's the training wheels. Close to Portland, close to Boston for a weekend drive, close enough to feel safe while you test whether Maine is something you can commit to. And if Biddeford feels like too much civilization for you, buckle up, because we're about to head north and this list gets progressively wilder. Location number 7, Rockland, the working waterfront that went upscale. From Biddeford, we drive an hour and 45 minutes up the coast to a place that captures the central tension of modern Maine better than anywhere else on this list. Rockland sits on Penobscot Penobscot Bay with a population of about 7,200 people, and it's fighting a quiet war with itself over what it wants to be when it grows up. For most of its history, Rockland was limestone and lobster. Quarries fed the lime kilns that powered the local economy through the 1800s. When that died, fishing took over. Sardine canneries lined the waterfront. Processing plants employed hundreds. The harbor smelled like work, not like a candle store, and nobody confused Rockland with a vacation destination. Then the Farnsworth Art Museum expanded. Then the Center for Maine Contemporary Art relocated here. Then the craft oyster bars started showing up, and the farm-to-table restaurants and the boutique hotels, and suddenly, Rockland had a problem that most struggling Maine towns would kill for: too much attention from the wrong tax bracket. Redfin data puts Rockland's recent median sale price around $370,000 to $424,000 depending on the month, with homes sitting about 70 to 80 days on market. Neighborhood Scout lists the median home value at $370,134, and 17% of the housing stock sits vacant, a number that reflects both seasonal ownership and an aging population that's dying faster than it's being replaced. The median income in Rockland is about $55,276. That creates a gap between what the art gallery crowd can afford and what the lobsterman's family can keep. Walk down Main Street on a summer afternoon and you'll see what the conflict looks like. A third-generation fisherman buying coffee next to a Brooklyn transplant opening a ceramic studio. A local hardware store next to a wine bar that sells glasses for $18. Neither side is wrong exactly, but they're building two different towns on top of each other, and only one of them can afford the property taxes that are coming. Fun fact, Rockland hosts the Maine Lobster Festival every August, a tradition since 1947. What started as a local celebration now draws 75,000 visitors to a town of 7,200. For 5 days, Rockland's population multiplies tenfold, and every restaurant, hotel, and rental within 30 miles fills up. That's the blessing and the curse of coastal Maine charm. The same beauty that makes you want to live here makes everyone else want to visit, and visit money eventually becomes investor money. The trade-off in Rockland is pace. You get a walkable downtown, genuine maritime culture, and a food scene that punches absurdly above its weight for a town this size. What you give up is affordability trajectory. Rockland is still reasonable today, but the arrow points in one direction, and it's not down. If you want Rockland, the window is open, but it's narrowing. And if Rockland feels like it's already been discovered, the next stop on this list is a town that saved itself from the inside out. Location number 6, Belfast, the town that saved itself. 30 minutes north of Rockland, sitting on the western shore of Penobscot Bay, Belfast is the town that figured something out that most dying American towns never do. You can't wait for a corporation to save you. You have to save yourself. Belfast's population hovers around 6,990. The median age is 56.7, one of the oldest demographics on this list, and the median household income sits at $61,322. None of those numbers scream boomtown, but here's where Belfast gets interesting. In the early 2000s, Belfast lost its primary employer when the MBNA credit card call center pulled out of town. Before that, it was chicken processing. Before that, it was shipping and sardines. Belfast had been dying in slow motion for decades, one employer exit at a time, and by the mid-2000s, Main Street had more for lease signs than operating businesses. What happened next wasn't a government bailout or a corporate relocation. It was a series of small, stubborn decisions by people who refused to leave. A food co-op opened, an independent bookstore launched, local artists rented cheap storefronts and started selling directly to the summer tourist traffic passing through on Route 1. A theater group renovated the Colonial Theater. Restaurants opened that had no business existing in a town of 6,800, places serving wood-fired pizza with locally foraged ingredients. And they survived because the people who opened them were also the people who ate there in the off-season. Redfin shows Belfast's recent median sale price spiking to $504,000, though that number is volatile in a town with only 25 to 50 sales per month, where one waterfront property can skew the entire data set. Homes sit roughly 68 days on the market. The more stable indicator is the median property value from census data, which pegs Belfast closer to $307,700. Either way, Belfast has gotten more expensive, and the creative economy types who helped save it are starting to feel the same squeeze they fled from in the first place. One resident summed it up on a local forum. "We moved here because it was weird and cheap, and nobody cared what you did for a living. Now it's weird and expensive, and everyone cares what you did for a living because they want to know if you can afford to stay." The Belfast trade-off is existential. You're buying into a community-driven economy that runs on goodwill, co-ops, and creative hustle. The nearest Target is 45 minutes away in Augusta. The nearest hospital is Waldo County General, which is adequate, but not what you'd call cutting edge. Winter is real, and the tourists who fund half the downtown economy disappear from November to May, leaving behind a core population that better enjoy each other's company. But if you want a town that feels genuinely alive, not manufactured alive, not corporate alive, but built from scratch by people who give a damn alive, Belfast is the strongest example in Maine. And from Belfast, we take a detour off the coast entirely to a place where the oysters have been famous for 2,500 years. Location number 5, Damariscotta, the oyster town. South of Belfast and tucked along the Damariscotta River, about 12 miles from open ocean, this is a town of 2,300 people that punches so far above its weight it's almost absurd. Damariscotta is the center of Maine's oyster industry, and that's not a recent development. Oyster shell middens along the riverbanks record Native American harvesting that dates back more than 2,500 years. When your town's signature industry predates the Roman Empire, you've earned the right to take it seriously. Damariscotta's Main Street is 2 blocks long, fully walkable, and packed with the kind of shops and restaurants that usually require a town 5 times this size. Redfin data shows the median sale price around $418,000, with homes moving fast, just 11 days on market in competitive months. The housing market here scores as very competitive, which tells you Damariscotta is no longer a secret to anyone paying attention. Niche puts the median home value at $289,000, and the median household income sits at roughly $59,659. The appeal is obvious the moment you park. River views, a walkable village center, King Ider's pub pouring local craft beer next to restaurants serving oysters pulled from the river that morning. Lincoln Academy, the local high school, draws students from surrounding towns and runs on a tuition-based model that gives it an independent school feel with public school access. Miles Memorial Hospital provides local healthcare, and Portland is about an hour south on Route 1 for anything the local system can't handle. The Damariscotta Pumpkin Fest, held every October, involves giant pumpkins that weigh over 1,000 pounds being raced down the river in boats. If that sentence doesn't tell you everything you need to know about this town's character, nothing will. But the trade-offs matter. Damariscotta is tiny, not charming, small, tiny. Actually tiny. You will know everyone, and everyone will know you, and that's either the dream or the nightmare depending on your tolerance for being recognized at the gas station in your pajamas. Shopping options are limited. The nearest Trader Joe's is an hour away, and the restaurant scene, as impressive as it is, closes down meaningfully in winter. You won't find a Starbucks. You will find 3 local coffee shops and a general store that makes a surprisingly good espresso. The real question with Damariscotta is whether a town of 2,300 can sustain what it's built. The economy runs on a mix of tourism, oyster aquaculture, healthcare from the local hospital, and a smattering of remote workers who discovered you can take a Zoom call from a house overlooking the river for less than a 1-bedroom apartment in Boston. That's a fragile ecosystem. Lose the oyster farms to warming waters, lose the tourists to a bad summer, and Damariscotta's economics tighten fast. But the people here seem unbothered by the precariousness. Maybe it's the 2,500 years of oyster history giving them a long view. Picture this. Saturday morning in Damariscotta, you walk the 2 blocks of Main Street with coffee from the local bakery, stop at the farmer's market on the waterfront, buy oysters that were pulled from the river before sunrise, and eat them standing at the dock watching ospreys circle over the water. Your total spent, including the coffee, $14. Your view, priceless. Your Monday commute, the hallway between your bedroom and your home office. Compared to Belfast, Damariscotta feels more polished, less gritty, more likely to appear in a magazine spread about hidden New England. At least in Belfast, there's still some edge left. Damariscotta sanded down its rough spots years ago, and what's left is a postcard, which is either appealing or suspicious, depending on your perspective. From the coast, we now take a hard left turn inland. The next town on this list has no ocean, no oysters, and no magazine spreads. What it has is a river, a mill, and a bet that the future looks nothing like the past. Location number 4, Skowhegan, the inland bet. This is where the list gets real. Skowhegan sits on the Kennebec River in Somerset County, about an hour and a half from the coast. Population runs around 8,500. It's a mill town, not a former mill town, with charming loft conversions. A mill town where the economic foundation spent decades crumbling and the rubble is still visible on certain blocks. Redfin put Skowhegan's median sale price at $285,000 with homes selling in about 55 days. Movoto lists the median closer to $259,000 with 87 days on market. That's a meaningful discount from the coastal towns we just covered, and the gap tells you everything about the risk-reward calculation here. Skowhegan is cheap because Skowhegan has been struggling, and struggling towns stay cheap until they don't. The bet people are making on Skowhegan centers around a few concrete developments. The old sappy paper mill site is being reimagined. A $50 million run-of-river project restored the Kennebec River's natural falls after 200 years behind a dam. And Skowhegan is banking on the idea that a revitalized waterfront can anchor downtown the way the mill once did. Bigelow Brewing Company, one of the state's best craft breweries, operates on 24 acres outside town with a full restaurant, event center, and canning facility. The Maine craft distilling scene has taken notice. Restaurants are opening downtown in spaces that were empty 3 years ago. One realtor told us, Skowhegan is where people go when they can't afford Belfast and they're too stubborn for Bangor. It's a gamble, but the buy-in is low enough that the gamble makes sense. Skowhegan also hosts the oldest continuously running state fair in the country, dating back to 1818. Every August, the Skowhegan State Fair draws tens of thousands of visitors, and for 10 days the town feels like the center of rural Maine. It's the kind of tradition that reminds you this place has survived 2 centuries of economic reinvention and is working on its third. The Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, founded in 1946, has trained some of the most important American artists of the last 80 years, and it operates every summer in the woods just outside town. You've probably never heard of it, and that's the point. The trade-offs in Skowhegan are heavier than anything we've discussed so far. This is not coastal Maine. There's no ocean breeze softening August or tourists propping up the restaurant scene in July. The poverty rate runs higher than the state average. Downtown still has gaps, blocks where the next business hasn't arrived yet and might not for years. Schools are improving, but lag behind southern Maine districts, and the winters, without that coastal moderation, hit harder. Somerset County gets serious snow, and serious in Maine means something different than it does in most of the country. Picture this: October in Skowhegan, fog lifting off the Kennebec, leaves turning along the riverbank, the smell of coffee and wood smoke drifting from somewhere downtown. You walk past the old mill buildings, past the new brewery tap room, past a storefront that's half renovated with a handwritten sign that says opening spring. Your mortgage payment is less than rent on a 1-bedroom in Portland. The question isn't whether Skowhegan is beautiful. The question is whether you trust it to keep becoming something. From Skowhegan, we jump northeast, deep into Penobscot County, to a town that lost everything and is building something from the wreckage that nobody predicted. Location number 3, Eastport, the easternmost city in America. We could have put Eastport lower on this list. The data says it belongs lower. The median home value sits around $148,000 to $173,000 depending on which source you trust. Redfin shows listings in the $250,000 to $590,000 range, but that spread reflects a market where a waterfront captain's house and an inland fixer-upper exist within the same square mile. The population is 1,292 and declining at about 0.3% annually. The median age is 62.9. The median household income is $46,205. On paper, Eastport looks like a town running out of time. In person, it feels like a town that decided time doesn't apply here. Eastport sits on Moose Island, connected to the mainland by causeway, at the far eastern tip of the United States. It is the easternmost city in the country, a title it guards with the quiet pride of a place that knows its claim to fame isn't going to attract theme parks. The tides here are among the most extreme on the East Coast, rising and falling over 20 feet twice daily. When the tide goes out, it reveals a moonscape of seafloor that stretches for hundreds of yards. When it comes back, the harbor feels like a bathtub being drawn by a giant. The town was once a sardine capital. At its peak in the early 1900s, Eastport operated 18 sardine canneries along the waterfront. The last one closed in 1983. What's left is a downtown of brick and wood frame buildings perched on a hillside overlooking Passamaquoddy Passamaquoddy Bay, where every window faces water and half the storefronts are occupied by artists, galleries, and one truly excellent pie shop. Eastport's 4th of July celebration is legendary in Down East Maine. The Pirate Festival brings the town to life in ways that its population numbers don't suggest are possible. For a few weekends a year, Eastport feels 10 times its size. The rest of the year, it feels exactly as small as it is, and that smallness is either liberation or loneliness, depending on what you're running from. The trade-offs here are about isolation, plain and simple. The nearest hospital with a full emergency department is in Calais, about 30 miles away. The nearest substantial shopping is further. Winter doesn't just arrive in Eastport, it moves in and renovates. The cost of heating a home this far north and this exposed to Atlantic wind is a budget line item that people from milder climates consistently underestimate. And the job market is almost non-existent in traditional terms. If you can't work remotely, run a small business, or survive on seasonal tourism income, Eastport's economic math doesn't work. But for the right person, someone who craves silence, who finds beauty in fog and tidal flats, who wants to know every single one of their 1,292 neighbors by name, Eastport is a place that gets under your skin and stays there. If Belfast is where you go when you want community, Eastport is where you go when you want solitude with just enough community to keep you sane. And if Eastport sounds remote, the next stop inland makes it look like a suburb. Location number 2, Millinocket, the gateway that lost its gate. 2 hours inland from the coast, in the deep woods of Penobscot County, Millinocket is the town that proves you can lose everything and still have a second act if you're willing to let go of the first one completely. Millinocket existed for one reason: paper. Great Northern Paper Company built the town in 1899, and for a century the relationship was simple. The mill employed the town served the mill. At peak operation, Millinocket's population exceeded 7,000, and Great Northern was producing enough paper to make it one of the most productive mills in the world. The company built housing, funded schools, maintained infrastructure. Millinocket wasn't a town with a mill, it was a mill with a town attached. Then the paper industry collapsed. Great Northern shut down operations in stages through the 2000s. The final closure came in 2008. Within a decade, Millinocket lost roughly a third of its population. Property values cratered. Homes that once sold for $120,000 dropped to $30,000 and sat there, unsold, with nobody to buy them and nobody left to care. What happened next is the most unlikely urban planning story in Maine. In 2016, the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument was designated on 87,500 acres of former industrial timberland adjacent to Baxter State Park. Suddenly, Millinocket wasn't just the gateway to Mount Katahdin and the Appalachian Trail's northern terminus. It was the gateway to a national monument, and that changed the math. Movoto data shows Millinocket's current median list price at about $175,000. 5 years ago, homes were selling in the $80,000 to $100,000 range. That's a staggering percentage increase, but the absolute numbers remain some of the most affordable in all of Maine. You can still find 3-bedroom, move-in ready homes under $150,000. For context, that's less than a down payment on a house in Portland. The New England Outdoor Center, situated on Millinocket Lake with direct views of Mount Katahdin, has become an anchor for the outdoor recreation economy. Knife Edge Brewing Company operates on site. Whitewater rafting companies run the west branch of the Penobscot. A TV and snowmobile trail networks crisscross the region. Remote workers drawn by National Geographic naming Katahdin the world's best hike are trickling in, buying those cheap houses, setting up home offices, and spending their California paychecks in a town where $175,000 buys a real home. The trade-offs are severe and should not be romanticized. Millinocket is isolated in a way that the coastal towns on this list are not. The nearest city of any consequence is Bangor, 70 miles south. Healthcare is limited. Schools serve a shrinking student population. The winters are legitimately brutal, with temperatures regularly dropping below zero and snowfall measured in feet, not inches. And the economic comeback, while real, is fragile. Millinocket is betting its future on outdoor tourism and remote workers, two forces that could shift with a recession, a policy change, or a few bad winters winter seasons that scare newcomers off. A local summed it up perfectly. We lost the mill and thought we'd die. We didn't die, but we're not sure what we are yet either. We're becoming something. Ask us again in 10 years. If Millinocket is a bet on reinvention, our final stop is a bet on something more primal. A bet that the edge of the country, the actual geographic edge, still has room for people who want to disappear, just a little, from everything they know. Location number 1. Lubeck, the edge of everything. This is it, the easternmost town in the contiguous United States. Not city, Eastport holds that title. Town. Lubeck is further east, a few miles down the road from Eastport, pressed against the Canadian border where the Bay of Fundy meets the Atlantic and the continent simply runs out of land. Population 1,246, median age 62.2, median household income around $43,750 to $55,500 depending on the source and the year. Poverty rate 20%, and the median home value, the number that makes every Californian and New Yorker on this channel do a double take, sits between $148,000 and $204,000. For less than the cost of a used Tesla, you can buy a house in the town that sees the first sunrise in America every morning. Lubeck was a sardine town. At its peak, over 20 canneries operated along the waterfront, processing the herring that flooded into the Bay of Fundy in numbers that seemed inexhaustible until they weren't. The last cannery closed decades ago, and Lubeck has been quietly shrinking ever since, losing 17.7% of its population since 2000, watching its young people leave for Portland or Bangor or Boston, watching its storefronts close one by one until what remained was silence, fog, and a raw beauty so intense it almost hurts to look at. West Quoddy Head Light, the iconic red and white striped lighthouse, sits on the easternmost point of the contiguous United States, and is probably the most photographed lighthouse in Maine after Portland Head. The Bold Coast hiking trail stretches along cliffs that rival anything on the Pacific coast. Campobello Island, FDR's summer retreat, sits just across the International Bridge. The natural setting is staggering, the kind of landscape that makes you understand why the people who stay here even when every economic indicator says they should leave. And people are starting to notice, not in flood numbers, not in a way that's changing the character of the town, but artists have been trickling in for years, drawn by the light. Lubeck's light quality is legendary among painters, the cheap studios, and the isolation that makes sustained creative work possible in a way that's hard to find in populated places. A few remote workers have followed, lured by the same logic that drew people to Millinocket: good internet, cheap housing, and a view that resets your nervous system every morning. Homes in Lubeck sit on the market for a median of 130 days. That's more than double the state average, and it tells you everything about the demand equation here. Lubeck isn't competing with Portland, it's barely competing with Eastport. The people who buy here aren't shopping around. They're choosing this specific life, this specific isolation, this specific fog-wrapped silence on purpose. And they're getting a deal that the rest of the real estate market hasn't figured out how to price correctly yet. The trade-offs are the most extreme on this list, and they need to be stated clearly. Lubeck is closer to New Brunswick, Canada than it is to any major American city. Portland is 180 miles away. Boston is 270 miles. The nearest Walmart is in Calais, 30 miles down Route 1. Healthcare options are limited to a small local clinic, and anything serious means a long drive. The winters are defined by wind, the kind of coastal wind that doesn't just make you cold, but makes you rethink your relationship with the concept of going outside. Unemployment runs near 8%, and that 20% poverty rate isn't an abstraction. It's visible on certain roads, in certain houses, in the way certain storefronts have been empty so long the for rent signs have faded to white. But remember that town from the hook, the one where the first sunrise in America hits your kitchen window. The nearest traffic light is 30 miles away, and the locals would rather you didn't come. This is it. Lubeck is the end of the road in every sense, geographic, economic, and philosophical. It's the place where the American continent runs out and you're left standing on a cliff with nothing between you and Europe but 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean, asking yourself whether this is what freedom actually looks like. For some people, the answer is yes, and for those people, Lubeck tech isn't a compromise. It's the whole point. 8 towns, 1 state. A journey from a revitalized mill complex 20 minutes south of Portland all the way to a fog-wrapped fishing village on the Canadian border where the continent ends and $150,000 still buys a home. The pattern across all 8 is remarkably consistent. These towns didn't wait for permission to reinvent themselves. Biddeford filled its mills with artists. Instead of mourning the textile industry, Belfast built a creative economy from a food co-op and a bookstore. Millinocket pivoted from paper to peaks. And Lubeck, stubborn, beautiful Lubeck, just kept existing on the edge of the world, waiting for the kind of people who don't need permission to find it. Maine's real story isn't happening in Portland, where the median home price passed $475,000 and the brunch lines wrap around the block. It's happening in the places the tourists skip, the mill towns that are filling back up, the fishing villages attracting artists instead of sardines, the inland communities betting their futures on mountains and rivers instead of factories. From 2020 to 2024, Maine's median home price grew more than 50% statewide, but the growth hasn't been even. The coastal tourist magnets got expensive. The places on this list, the ones that require a little more commitment, a little more imagination, and a lot more flannel, still offer something that most of America has priced out of existence. A real community in a real place at a price that doesn't require a 6-figure salary. Maine is the 7th most popular state for inbound migration in the country right now. People are coming. The question isn't whether these towns change. It's whether you get there before they do. If this was helpful, hit the like button. If you know someone who's been thinking about Maine, send them this video. Subscribe if you want to see more deep dives into the places nobody else is covering. And drop a comment telling us which town surprised you the most and whether you'd actually make the move. We'll see you in the next one.